Okay friends, one of the first things we need to do to start our job is to safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, let's go ahead and remove all 5 of our 19mm lug nuts and then the wheel. The next thing that we're going to have to do is try to push back our caliper piston a little bit. That's going to be located in this area here. That can easily be done with a small pry bar. I'm just going to carefully get in between the caliper and the rotor, and I'm going to gently pry. Now once I have that back far enough so I have no pressure on this, we can continue on by removing our 2 caliper slider bolts. We'll use a 10mm for these. Leave that in there a couple threads. Remove and inspect your hardware, set it aside. Let's continue with that pry bar. For this aspect, we're going to come right up along the top here, in between the caliper and the bracket itself. I'm just going to gently pry on this. Now at this point, we can inspect this. We'll just set it aside for now. Separate that. Now let's go ahead and take one of our lug nuts. I'm just going to go ahead and start it onto one of the studs. A little bit of penetrant on this. Now let's use our hammer, give this a bonk to break it free. Remove your rotor. Now that we have that out of the way, the next thing that we want to start doing is de-adjusting our emergency brake shoes. That can be done from right underneath this area here. You're going to find an adjuster. We just want to take a nice pry bar. We're going to carefully get in between this area, and essentially we just want to turn this in either direction, whichever one's going to make it so it gradually gets smaller in this area. That's going to relieve tension and we can get this out of the way. The next thing I like to do is just take a screwdriver. I'm going to carefully get in between the shoe and the wheel bearing and gently pry, separating this area. This is going to drop out the adjuster for us. There's that adjuster. Go ahead and get your screwdriver out of the way. Now we can remove this spring as well. Set that aside as well. Now let's continue on with a couple tools here. Essentially all I want to do is try to get onto this ear right here, right where the pin is. We can press this in, and I'm just going to go ahead and try to get that little pin up and into the larger hole. There we are. Let's give this a little wiggle. We can remove this part. Now let's come in through the back of the backing plate here. I'm going to use a magnet and I'm going to try to remove my e-brake pin. Once you have that out, let's just go ahead and do the same exact thing to the other shoe. Now that we have both of our anchor pins out of there, let's go ahead and grab onto our emergency brake shoe. I'm going to try to lift this up and out of this area. Sometimes you might find that one of your lug studs is holding this in. Generally, if that happens, I just go ahead and twist the axle a little bit. That should give us a little bit more room to be able to get this out of here. There's all that. Now let's go ahead and use a nice brush. We're going to clean up the area. Now the next thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and clean up the mating surface of the hub. You can tell that I have a lot of rot buildup on mine. I like to make sure that it's free and clear of as much debris as possible. Now that I've got this sanded down as good as I can, I'll hit it with a little parts cleaner. We're going to let this dry and then we'll continue on with our shoes. Next, I always like to use a little bit of high temperature grease. And the areas that I want to apply some grease is in each of these ears. This is essentially where the emergency brake shoes are going to ride. So I'll go in this one on the other side, same exact spot. And then there's going to be a couple areas on the backing plate that you can generally see have a raised area. Those are generally going to be the areas that the shoe is going to be resting against. There should be pretty much 3 of them on either side of this. Right down here. There we are. And now I'll just do the same on the other side of the plate, the same 3 spots. All right, now we can get ready to install our emergency brake shoes. To do this, I always grab the top spring. That's this one right here. I'm just gonna go ahead and put it right across the shoe, coming into that top hole. We can do the same on the other one. Now at this point, we can go ahead and install the shoes on here. I'll put one right up and over. I'm gonna go ahead and put that into position, right up along this area here. Now I'm just gonna carefully try to pull on this. Just keep in mind that it is under spring tension and I don't want it to come off and potentially hurt you. Let's go ahead and pull it. Just get that into its groove. It can be a little bit difficult sometimes. Now it's time to look at the rest of our emergency brake hardware here. This is your anchor pin, and you're going to notice that it's different than the original. The original one has kind of like a Christmassy looking triangle on it. This one in particular has a flat blade. Now for this, what you're essentially going to want to do is you're going to have it facing straight up and down inside the backing plate. The next thing that you would want to do is just take your clip. We're going to go ahead and slide it right up and over this. It's going to press up against the emergency brake shoe. Then we're going to press down on this as hard as we can so this slides through. Twist that pin a little bit, and then when it's in this position, straight across like that, is when it's in its fully locked position. Now with all that said, I'm going to try to get it done on this side right here, and the process will be the same for the other side. All right, so I've got the pin coming through there. Now I'm just going to try to get the shoe up and over that as well. Now you can see that I have it going through the slot in the shoe right there. Now we can take this shoe, I'm going to try to wiggle it, try to separate it so I have access to this. Next I'm going to use a nice long pry bar. You can use whatever you might happen to have. I'm going to try to get right down and in between this area here to hold this for me. Now I can grab my clip, we'll start it on there, and then get this pin twisted and locked in. Now we can take our clip. Sometimes getting it in between this area can be a little bit difficult. You want to be very careful because it is going to be under spring tension once you start sliding it through. Just keep that in mind so you don't get a pinch. Now I need to straighten out that pin. I want this pin to be facing straight up and down. So now I'm getting to the point that it's going to get a little bit more difficult. I have the clip in here, but what I need to do is just try to press in this clip far enough so the pin comes through it. Once it does, we need to twist the pin so it locks it into the locking clip. Okay, get that so it's turned a little bit here. Okay, now we're going to release it. Inspect it, make sure your pin's completely locked in. This looks great, so now I'm going to do the same to the other side, and then we'll continue on down here. All right, I finally got this side on there. It was a little bit more difficult than the forward aspect. Now we can continue on to our adjuster. Let's use a little bit more of that high temperature grease, or at least some copper never sees, whichever you might happen to have. We're just going to coat the threaded area, and now we'll take this, we're going to screw it right on there. That looks pretty great. Now we can take this, slide that on there as well. Let's go ahead and take this lower spring. I'm going to start it in the hole that's located right over here. We'll do the same on this shoe over here. Once we have it in there, we can put in our adjuster. The adjuster needs to go in this direction, so the cog is facing towards the front of the vehicle. If you have it backwards, it's not going to function properly. I'm going to try to get this side in. I'm going to come in here, spread the shoe a little bit. Let's see. Just got to get the proper angles. Now you want to inspect it. If you can see yours looks just like this right here where it's not sitting perfectly, just go ahead and give that a little twist. You want to ensure that it's sitting into the groove. All right, so now at this point you can tell that this is nice and loose. We're going to continue on adjusting this until there's no play in this area. Now at this point, we're going to continue on with putting on our rotor. Once you have your rotor on there, the next thing you want to do is check the emergency brake shoe adjustment. To do that, I'm going to use a pry bar and I'm going to come right along the back here. We're going to gently pry on the e-brake lever up against the sway bar link and just try to see exactly where the emergency brake is going to be able to hold this shoe to stop the vehicle. So right about there, I can feel like it stops. I'm going to try to turn this axle. Doesn't move at all. Now I'm going to release it, try again. It spins. Let's just try it once more for good measure. I only push it a little bit, and it holds it perfectly. Once I release it, it frees right up. If you found that you went ahead and you pried on this and it had to push very far, that essentially would tell you that you want to get back inside here and you want to try to adjust the e-brake shoes a little tighter, closer to the rotor. Another thing that might happen is maybe you try to put the rotor on, you try the e-brake, it seems like it works pretty good. When you let go, it still holds. If that's the case, you need to de-adjust your adjuster a tiny bit. So to do that, essentially you just go ahead and grab onto that rotor. You're going to take this right off, get down here to the adjuster, make your adjustment, put the rotor back on, and retest it. Now it's time to grab that caliper. We're going to go ahead and take it and put it right up and over the rotor here. Looking at the pads, you can see that it has those little cutouts. We want to make sure that those cutouts are sitting right over this bracket. That looks good. Now we're just going to go ahead and slide this right up and over. All right. Go ahead and grab onto your 2 caliper slider bolts. We'll start both of these in. At this point, we can bottom both of these out. We'll snug them up and we'll torque them to manufacturer specification. Let's torque these to 24 foot-pounds. If you took this off of here, also put that on. Now we can get the wheel back up on here. We'll start all of our lug nuts on, bottom them out, get the wheel back on the ground, and then torque the lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. All right, so now at this point, you're going to want to hop inside the passenger compartment of the vehicle, pump up the brakes. After they're nice and firm, make your way inside the engine compartment and double check your brake fluid. That's this area right here. Go ahead and open this up, take a peek inside. If it needs to be filled, top it off with .3 brake fluid. Okay, friends, we got our e-brake shoes in there. What's left to do now? Now you want to go ahead and go over to the other side of the vehicle and do the exact same thing. When you do one side e-brake shoes, you need to make sure you do the other side, of course, with that hardware as well. Aside from that, take it for a road test. Make sure you don't hear any funny noises. Thanks.